In the second part of the presentation, I'll discuss the database and API endpoints of the system. Whenever the user creates an account, we store the data in the database. Data such as the user email address, the password, and the balance of the account. So all those data persist in the database, and any request from the user interface updates the data in the database. Now for the implementation of the Mongo database, I use the data abstraction layer file to make it easy to update the code whenever we change the database. So this is our data abstraction layer file. So all the logic of the database is in this file. So I simply exported all the functions that we're going to need into our index file. So anytime we need a function from the database, we just make a call to the data abstraction layer instead of writing the code of the data of the database directly into the index file. One of the new features that added to the database is a system to keep track of every transaction that happens in the application. So whenever a user makes a transaction, we keep track of the time and the type of the transaction. So this object will contain all the information regarding the transaction that we need to save to the database. So here we have the type of the transaction, which is in fact an account creation, and also the time. So this is an example of how the data is stored in the database. I think this type of design makes it easy to retrieve our data from the database. For example, here we have an array of objects, which makes it easy to retrieve our events whenever we want to loop through the array. And this is the documentation of our RESTful API. In this case, I chose not to use GraphQL because this is a simple application, and using GraphQL could add some unnecessary complexity to the application. So these are different endpoints. And this is the home page. This is where we get access to the user interface of the application. This is the endpoint we use to create the account. These are the parameters: name, email, and password. And this is the type of response we get if the account creation was successful. We have the login endpoint, the update endpoint, and the endpoint we use to find the user with their email address. And this is the all account endpoint. So that sums up the second part of the presentation. In this part, I discussed the database and different API endpoints of the system.